All right. Well, tonight we want to have a little bit of a get to know you time with Pastor Mark. Some of you who were with us at Lighthouse from the beginning will remember that Pastor Mark and his family joined us for a time before he accepted the call to go pastor up at Lighthouse San Jose. So we had how many months was that? You guys were with us? 6 months. And this is back when we were in Pasadena. And so for those of you who remember the Pasadena days when we met at 4:30 Sunday afternoon, I mean, some of you who wished you could sleep in, you should have been there then. I mean, you could have slept until like 3 p.m. I didn't know what to do with myself on those days. I'm not used to waiting for church to start at 4:30. But the one nice thing we had was we had dinner every Sunday. And we had a wonderful team of people preparing food. And so as people came to our church, we got to know them through that time. So when Pastor Mark and Julian, I'll ask him to share a little bit about some of his ministry journey. He came at a time where things had been a little tough. And so it was really just a wonderful time getting to know him and his family, as well as walk through the process of eventually getting up to the Lighthouse San Jose. But let's first start off, Mark. For those of these folks who don't know you, maybe you can just share a little bit about your background, just kind of life history. If you could condense it like in about 5 minutes, like just your basic life history, and then I'm going to have some more specific questions regarding your testimony and then ministry journey.
Sure. It's a tough question.
So where were you born? Where
was I born? If I'm not looking straight at you, it's because the lights are really bright.
Yeah.
And then maybe I'll preach with sunglasses tomorrow.
It's really bright.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. That's great.
Nice.
That's great. When you get old, your eyes don't adjust so well, and it's hard to. Okay.
Yes.
And then when I give bad answers, you can shine them really bright. So, I was born in Toronto, Canada, a long time ago, 1967. The last year the Toronto Maple Leafs won the Stanley Cup. It's been a drought since, but we still hope.
So for those of you who don't know,
that's hockey. That's hockey.
Yes, that's hockey. And Pastor Mark is from Canada. And I will tell you, when I first got to meet him, I didn't know that except through some of the words that he said. And it forever made an impression. So whenever I hear the word process, I automatically think of Pastor Mark. Because I've heard him share that word many, many times. And I love hearing when I actually kind of wait during the conversation, and I feel very comforted. Because that means Pastor Mark is with me, and we're having a wonderful conversation. Anyway, okay, so you're born in Toronto, Canada, and kind of give us a sort of a quick overview of life until you, until you ended up in LA.
Whew. It's a faraway time. For all, how many of you born and raised here in Southern California? Okay, wow, look at that. That's like this is sort of Asian heaven. If you could grow up as an Asian anywhere, it's like Southern California would be the dream, with the exception maybe Pastor John, where you were basically. We sort of are the same era because I'm only a few years behind you. So
50s.
Yeah. Is this being recorded? I just want to see.
Is this being recorded?
How many people I offend. Anyways, right. Canada was whiter than white. And it was an incredibly racist place to be. And so we were sort of, I think, very similar to Pastor John. We were like the only Asians on the street. The only Asians at the Christian school for a little while, the only Asians in the public school. Canada actively restricted Asian immigration. And so that was an interesting experience. And it was really interesting growing up in basically very white churches that really had an archaic view of Asians that sort of went back to the mission era. And we were known as the Chin Boys. We were also known as the Presbyterians as well. So it just sort of gives you an idea of how sort of the communities functioned at that time. But nonetheless, God was gracious. I was born and raised in the church, basically. Came home. I guess this is the long route. It's late. This is way past my bedtime, so you're going to get really long stories. So I came home in grade 1, and I was cussing like a fiend. We were in the public school, and then my mom raptured me and took me out and said, "You're going to a Christian school. Like, that would make my life so much better." And so I did the whole thing: fundamentalist Christian school, evangelical church all the way up. I would say high school, college, just incredibly disillusioned with the church because what I read in my Bible I wasn't seeing in the church, and church leadership was just a mess. I think that was sort of intensified by being Asian. You just saw how much racism and how much cultural Christianity was driving the church. Little did I know that Asians were just the same. It's just that they had their own cultural Christianity that they did. They did their own shuffle. But I guess I did college, did medical school. I had an older brother who wasn't saved and really wanted him to know the gospel. And so he was in LA doing the whole movie entertainment thing. And so I took a job when I graduated from residency and came down to Culver City to do family practice and internal medicine, and did that from 1994, before many of you were born, right? Until, 2003, 2004, I did biblical counseling with Wayne Mack, which turned my life upside down in a big way, and then ended up going to seminary and eventually got connected with you.
All right. Well, there are obviously a lot of things that Pastor Mark is having to kind of gloss over, so you can ask him during meal times or, want to catch him sometime during the weekend. Share a little bit about your testimony. How did you come to know Christ?
I was really blessed to have a godly Christian mother who prayed a lot for me because I was getting into trouble quite a bit. Started young, ended up in the principal's office frequently. But she prayed, and the prayers of a righteous man, and I believe that extends to women, even though that's labeled as a man, avails much. So I had a God-fearing mom, and for me, it's an interesting story. My mom is half Chinese, half Caucasian, and she was part of the foster child system in Canada. So she was illegitimate. She was born out of wedlock at a time where it was completely taboo for you to have not just a child out of wedlock, but to have a mixed child. And by God's grace, that was really pre-abortion era, because I'm pretty sure she would have been aborted had she been born, basically 60s onwards, but that wasn't available. And by God's grace, she was adopted into a whiter than white Caucasian family who were believers. And she got saved through them. My non-biological, her father, the father who adopted her, had fought in both world wars, and they were Christian Missionary Alliance people. And she got saved through that, and she just had a fear of God, a love for the Lord, and a love for His Word. And so my earliest childhood memories really, you sort of go to church and you experience incredible racism and things are just all messed up. But by God's grace, home was a safe place where my mom delighted to read Bible stories to my brother and I. So my earliest and fondest memories are being on my parents' bed with her with that really old school children's Bible, with all the really sort of outdated illustrations, but her walking us through that and making that fun, making that come alive. And of course, because she believed it, it was precious to her and it was exciting to her. And that really laid a foundation and prepared my heart for the gospel. And God was gracious at a fairly early age, to wake me up in the middle of the night and be distressed about my relationship and my standing with the Lord, realizing that things weren't right, and to stir me to come to her and ask what I needed to do to be saved and to really bring me to repentance. But I think for many of you, how many of you were raised in the church? Okay, so most of you. that was a bit of a rough ride, being saved at a young age, but growing up, and it wasn't that rough. There are people in Siberia, right? There are people in China who are being persecuted, but let's just say it was a very confusing time because the Lord had clearly done a work in my heart. But I think much of what you are blessed with and what you have, we didn't have at that time. We had a lot of cultural Christianity at that time.
Great. Share with us a little bit how you ended up taking the route toward going to pastoral ministry.
There's a recurrent theme of bad churches, and maybe I should take that back. Churches that were just trying to do the best they could. But there was a very big disconnect, I think, between the word of the Lord and the Spirit of the Lord and what they were doing. There was a lot of tradition. And so by God's grace, I ended up at Grace Community Church. And that was probably, we're talking about me at the age of 32, came to LA, prayed to the Lord and said, I just want a decent church, decent Bible study, decent Christian friends. Basically what many of you have here. And God saw fit when I was in LA to make me wait for 4 years for that. Church after church after church. And just train wreck experiences of what was coming out of people's mouths and what was happening. I mean, if you get a chance to do the LA church situation, there's a healthy amount of craziness out there. But God was gracious. And I can tell you all about that some other time. But anyways, God was gracious and got us to Grace Community Church. And I think that was one of the first times where the word of the Lord and the person of Christ was being lived and practiced, not just in the pulpit, but in the rest of the church. And there's no perfect church, and it's not like Grace Community Church doesn't have its challenges and its struggles, but there's clearly a maturity level there among the elders and the leadership, which really, I think, protects that church. And so I loved church. The Lord changed my heart from being very, I think, bitter and resentful and disillusioned with the church to really falling in love with the church. And so I just served, became a deacon, and then just wanted to get equipped. And so, it started with biblical counseling. And then, when seminary was there, it was as I was increasingly leading and increasingly serving, I wanted to be equipped to do so in the word of the Lord. And so going into seminary was just an opportunity to be equipped for whatever the Lord had in store, so that if I could serve in the church in any way, I would do so, anchored in God's word, not personal experiences or traditions. And, that was kind of one step after the other. So when I went to seminary, it was really with that intent of just becoming equipped. So even when we met and things were unclear what was going to happen in San Jose, and I came to you and I said, you know what, I'm being given job offers, and it's more money than I'd ever seen before, basically, and I would be happy to be at Lighthouse LA for the rest of my life and serve and work as a physician. And I remember you saying, that's fine. Maybe if you could be patient and just wait and see how this plays out, if you're able to do that, that's something you might consider doing. So
one of the things that I know when we first met, we were talking about some of the challenges that you had gone through, and without having to go into detail, but what would you say are some of the, one or two key lessons you came out of just going through that time where you were at Grace Advance, you were trying to help out at a church that had gone through some rough times, and that was kind of right before you ended up coming to LA?
Church can be messy. I don't know. I think maybe the Lord's been preparing me for that for the entirety of my life. And I mean, that's your experience too, right? Is church is messy. But I think we're messy. And I think we bring our messes into church. But Christ is good and he's gracious and he's got a plan and he builds his church and he's faithful and he's good. But, he hasn't come yet. And I think until that time happens, part of his plan for us is a cross, and I know we're never too excited about that, but that's what we need to be sanctified and refined. And I think to prepare people for ministry, he really has to break their hearts in big ways. And part of that, I think, is seeing people in the church sadly sin. We would like to think things are different, and they are different in the church. I believe they are definitely different. But I think that that's hard because you make yourself vulnerable in your serving and you open your heart up to the Lord. And so you open your heart up too to the people of the Lord. And so when there's sin in the church, which inevitably there is, that's a tough deal. And so I would say, part of those experiences with working with Grace Advance and working in different churches, ministry is about getting your hands dirty. I think that's the reality, but we have a Savior who in his time and in his way does all things well. And I think it requires just an incredible amount of faith to wait for that. I think in the minute and the moment, things can get, rough, shall we say.
For sure. Let's switch gears a little bit. One of the fun things that is always, I'm sure, something most people are pretty interested is, especially if the speaker's married, how did you meet Julie, and how did she agree to marry you?
Yeah, well, the Lord stepped in, intervened. I think if we had been at the same church, I don't think it would have ever happened. But God was great and merciful and gracious. I think I was like 39 when we met, so I was
There's hope.
I was an old dog basically, and and I'm even older now basically. So chasing around those two little guys, but where do you start with that? There's some complexity there. How many of you know Han Cho at Grace Community Church? Do any of you know he's
an elder there?
He's an elder there. But anyways, he and I were in this. Anyways, people didn't know what to do with two Asian guys who were allegedly well-educated and serving intensely. We didn't quite fit that master's college mold of I'm 19 and 20 and it's time to get married and we should have our 7 kids by the age of 27. We didn't fit that mold. And so when I was at Grace Community Church, it was a little bit before all the Asians came. Grace on Campus was sort of big, but it was a little separate. It was just starting to come in. And I think the great thing about Grace Community Churches is the Lord is, when you go and see how diverse and multicultural it is now, it's an amazing thing. I mean, and that's the word of the Lord that's done that, but it wasn't quite always that way, right? Mm-hmm. So when I was there, it was a little bit wonky, I would say, from that perspective. People really weren't sure what to do. So Han Cho and I, and I'll just speak for myself anyways, it was the dating situation was interesting and strange. I'll just say that.
It's reality.
I remember one of the pastors there who was really sweet, great guy, sharing with me. He said, Mark, just because counsel comes from a Christian person doesn't make it Christian counsel. So you would get all sorts of advice of, you should date this person, or you should do this, or you should do that. And I just assumed that because it was coming from someone who was in leadership or whatever, I should do it. And it ended up being in a lot of crazy and weird and strange situations. But that being said, my heart's desire was to marry a girl or be together with a young lady who was at the same church that I was at. And there was a reason for that. There was just a desire really to come under the same worship, the same headship, and the same teaching, and to have our hearts knit together really by the same doctrine. And as you spend time with people from different churches or different denominations, you realize you may be saying the same things, but people mean very different things. And it can be it can get really strange. There was just that desire to serve in the church and serve in ministry, and to have someone who just had a heart to serve and be in ministry as well, and to be on the same page as that. And so I was really, really committed to that. And it didn't seem to be happening at Grace Community Church. I served in a ministry that was, everybody who was in that ministry, they were more or less, the vast majority of them were like 50 and over, basically, and their kids were in college. But that was the ministry that the Lord put me in. And there was almost no single people to spend time with or meet. And every time I tried to leave that ministry, the Lord pulled me back for different responsibilities. But I always held close to me Christ's word: seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And that the priority for serving in ministry wasn't to find a wife per se, or to find a social group, or to find a group of peers or fun people to be with, but to do the Lord's work. And that came at a cost. And even at a place like Grace Community Church, that came at a cost. So I served for probably 12 years in a ministry that singles rarely went to. Older folks, but it was a biblical counseling ministry. Dr. Street was over that ministry. And so as I got older and people weren't sure what to do with me, like I'd have older godly saints who just loved them dearly, but they would come and they couldn't understand why someone who was a physician, who was over the age of 30 and wasn't married. And so they would sort of ask all those indirect questions of, were you divorced before? Do you believe you have the gift of celibacy? And then it's starting to go down. It's like, no, basically. And then at the end, what was interesting was many of the peers, some of the people were like, Mark, you're just such an outlier with who you are. Like during that time, I said, okay, I'm just going to devote myself to ministry. And I'm going to primarily minister to younger Christian men, okay, because I'm going to focus on that aspect of things, because it's just weird ministering to Christian sisters, right? You're there, you're a single man, you're not married, you're not going to be in youth ministry. I was told by some, you're over 30, you're single, so things like children's ministries or youth ministries are probably going to be frowned upon a little bit, right? Because you're not married, you're in that weird demographic. So I'm bringing out all the strangeness of the church, right? So, a number of the folks were saying, you're such an outlier. You need to do online dating. You need to, they're finding all these different things that, the next step after online dating didn't work out was probably to get a mail order bride from somewhere. That's the direction things were going, basically, as far as what you need to do to get a wife. They couldn't figure out, how do we solve this problem? And I remember just saying, look, the Lord is sovereign. He's in control. He knows what I need. He knows if there's someone there to serve alongside with me, or he knows if I need to be single. And I trust the Lord, and I'm going to live on that, and I'm going to die on that, and the Lord will do what he's going to do. And if there's someone he has in mind, I would prefer to have someone who's going to be serving, who has a heart for the Lord, to serve in ministry. And, the Lord answered that desire. I mean, he was the one, obviously, who gave me that desire, but there was a young man in the Foundry, I believe it was. One of the shepherds there had brain cancer. And Kurt Gebhardt's pulled me in because he was unhappy. This young man came from a single-parent family and, was like young guy, late 20s, brain tumor. And Kurt was unhappy with the care he was receiving from the physicians. And he pulled myself and Honcho and some other and put together a team of folks who were lay people with professions that could help, and put together really a care team for this young man, to be his advocate, to go to physicians' appointments, to look out for his mom, to do all of those different things. And it was through that experience that one of the other young physicians who was helping out with that, he ended up introducing me to Julie and said, she's at a church plant, TMS pastor. Think you should meet her friend, which was interesting. I was to be set up with her friend. and her friend didn't want to date a pastor. So she handed my name off to Julie, right? And I didn't really want to go through with this, but I was at that stage where if people in the church set me up, I would do it and go to honor the Lord. And because I said, as crazy as it is, they love me, so I'm going to do it out of a courtesy. I'm going to show them respect. I'll at least follow through. Okay, I'm not going to be a flake or a wimp about this, and I'll step up. So I found out after Julie didn't really want my number or to be connected with me. We were kind of like two hot potatoes, but we were both sort of in this situation where people had asked and we felt obligated, and so we met, and sort of the rest is history.
Now, I just want you to remember this point now, okay? Some of us are looking for like this, magical, like, you're going to see each other across the room and, all of a sudden everything's going to click. This is not what happened, right? I mean, but I really appreciate what Mark was sharing here. What are really the desires of your heart, and what is it that you really trust the Lord with when it comes to this area? And it's hard. I mean, I think every married couple, will let you know. They're so glad the dating days are over because, that's just a pain. But how you set yourself and who you marry really matters. And it might not sound like a movie story sort of, path. And so sometimes when you get to hear it, I remember hearing their story, it's just hilarious listening to it because this is not like something that seems so smooth. So how old are you when you got married, Mark?
I was 42.
42. Okay. So for some of you, you're like, wow, that's a little later than I'm kind of hoping for. But if you see it in light of a bigger plan, God's plan, and I think this is something I've counseled people, would you rather wait for that right person that God is going to be honored in a relationship that you really share, one heart, one mind, or do you kind of jump the gun on that and compromise? Because I know some people are so wanting to get married that it's kind of like discernment goes out the window. And I have a number of friends who got married in their 40s. And it's hard because I got married pretty early. I got married at 23. So, I felt bad almost, for getting married. Not really. I'm happy I got married then. But at the same time, when I look at them and I see them now, the friends that they have become, I can't see anyone better for each other because they really come together.
I would say, look, is it the person God has given you to serve Him with? Mm-hmm. And it's like, man, if you meet that person at 23, more power to you. Like when I see people dragging their feet and I'm like, do you love the Lord? Yes. Does she love the Lord? Yes. Do you want to serve the Lord together? Yes. So it's like, then what are you waiting for? I mean, you're blessed that I look at you and you've 20 years of marriage on me. I wish I had 20 years with Julie. That being said, you know what I mean? You sort of see how the Lord has played it out and how He's, perfectly, it's Matthew 19, whom the Lord has brought together, let no man separate. You just sort of see, okay, yeah, this is what it was about.
Well, I'm sure, ladies, you could ask Julie.
She's far more entertaining than I am. Tomorrow afternoon, right? 1:00. You can see if our stories match.
Julie is a straight shooter. She will tell you just straight up. She's so much
Korean.
Fun.
What's the demographic here? How many Koreans do we have in the building? Korean Americans. Okay. All right. How many Chinese? Okay. I like to see the Chinese folks representing, Jew was always grieved that San Jose started Korean and then went Chinese, right? Referred to it as Lighthouse China.
China
was San Jose.
Yeah, always interesting to see how things
Julie's
have worked
Korean,
out.
so she brings the Korean truth.
Why don't you share a little bit? So you're with us at Lighthouse LA for about 6 months, and since this is obviously our Lighthouse LA Church Retreat, maybe share some of the things that you were able to experience, and what things were encouraging for you during that time.
We had come out of a pretty rough time because we were involved in Grace Advance, working in church plants and church splits and mediating, and things were messy. But I think we loved our time. It was God's gift to us. Our time in LA for that 6 months and maybe a little bit longer before we ended up going to San Jose was just an incredibly sweet time. There was an element of, I tend to think of local churches, that each local church is like a different child of God on a macro scale, and each of your children are different. And so churches can be faithful, love the Lord, but have a unique and distinct ministry. And there was something unique about what was happening on a church plant level and a smaller level, and to see things that Lighthouse LA was able to do and to carry out the word of the Lord and to honor him in a way that couldn't happen at Grace Community Church. And I love Grace Community Church. That was home for me. That was, in so many ways changed my life in countless different ways. But, it's a big church. And so it was just an amazing thing for me to come to Lighthouse LA and to see the Great Commission being carried out, to see the love of Christ, and to see church being done and things happening that you could see parts of Scripture that were being carried out that you might not necessarily see at a larger church, at a great church like Grace Community Church, just by virtue of the calling of where that was. I think those Sunday afternoons when we sort of did that trek across town from west side to east side, and all the kids, just kind of hung out, and the basement was hotter than a pistol, and you'd have those huge fans, right? Going. But there was a sweetness in that time, and definitely a spirit and a fellowship and a communal spirit that was real and special and from above. And of course, you can't stay that way forever. A church has got to grow. But that was just a very sweet time for us and our family, and especially for our boys. Even though, the strange thing is when we went to San Jose, they kept on referring to LA as our old church. They don't have any memory of their time at Grace Community Church, but that's the old church, the old church. So when anybody came, like Pastor John would come up, or any of you came up to San Jose, they would be, those are from our old church. Sadly, those memories have started to fade a little bit now, and the church has changed. So when they come back, it's a little intimidating, and it's different, and the church is much bigger than it was. But I think that time in that era, basically, and all the kids and the families and the parents and everybody sort of pitching in and everybody being connected is just it's a magical moment.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah, I'm just reminded, we used to meet upstairs in the main sanctuary, if you remember. And there was I don't know, how many of us? 40, 50 in a place where that seated 500. And I remember people would sit in the way back. And I'd be up there by myself in the front thinking why are they sitting so far away and not even together?
But your parents would come and then they'd sit up in the front.
Yeah. My parents
consistently.
Yeah, I thought they were going to just come visit once, and they ended up coming every Sunday. But then we went downstairs. For those of you who remember, it was so hot. And I remember we were all glistening. I mean, everyone was, and I remember people just sitting there just but to everyone's credit, you still kept coming. I think that was the miracle. Wow, people are still staying here, despite how hard it is. So yeah, it brings back that was a really special time. So, well, can you share with us a little bit about, how long have you been in San Jose now, pastoring?
5 years.
5 years. Okay, that has gone by so
It feels
fast.
like 50. It's pastoral ministry is like dog years, right?
Exactly.
Is that a fair statement? It's not just in San Jose; it's LA and San Diego.
It's definitely.
Except only Pastor John's got a full head of hair. I don't know what happened to the rest of us. Patrick, myself, we're all falling by the wayside and falling apart. He's timeless.
I have to thank my dad on that one. Strong hair genes. Yeah, everything else is falling apart, but the hair is strong. All right. So can you share with us a little bit, how are things in San Jose? Maybe share a little bit about ministry and things that we're praying for.
Yeah, we're blessed. We're growing, and I would say growing as far as maturity goes. I think of, what's so valuable and important is to see people mature as well as grow in numbers. And I think that's been, it's been hard. Ministry's been hard. I think the magic time was when we could just be members and hang out and be regular Joes at a church for that 6 months. Once you step in and put the pastor's hat on, a lot of things change, and that's okay. That's the way it's meant to be. But I would say, ministry is just spiritual warfare. It is. We're so blessed to be in San Jose. We're so blessed to be at the church there. It's a gift from the Lord that we don't deserve. It's a better situation, quite frankly, and a better church situation than so many of the guys who come out of TMS end up in. And yet it's still hard because I think at the end of the day in Ephesians 6, we don't fight against flesh and blood, but we fight against powers and principalities. And there's just pushback from every angle that you can possibly imagine. So it's been a challenging season for the elders there. I think it's been hard, but it's been incredibly gratifying and good. And the Lord has grown us. He's grown us in unity. He's grown us in Christ. He's matured us. You might not see it, but from the inside, you just see men stepping up, taking responsibility, handling difficult situations, which initially they would have been intimidated or terrified by. And it's interesting to see the Lord sort of incrementally increasing the challenges. So you look back and say, wow, he really did protect us those first few years. We didn't deal with certain types of craziness, which we're starting to see, which is a praise the Lord, because we want to be reaching out. We want to be ministering. We're there to help. We're all sinners, and we all need Jesus. And, there's been a fair amount of transition and changes that have had to happen there. But, God seems to be doing a good work in spite of us.
Yep. Well, I can tell you one of the things that has been a blessing is we call it the Lighthouse Alliance. It's and really what it is, for the most part, it's the pastors, the four of us, Pastor Patrick in San Diego, Pastor James in Orange County, and then Pastor Mark in San Jose, and myself in LA. And we get together periodically just to have a time where we can, share, pray, discuss things, ask questions. We started off, we had another Lighthouse Church in East Bay at the time, and so the get-go really was rough. That first year was really hard, but I think through that, one of the things that came out of that was a strengthened relationship. When I first met Mark, I didn't know him. Just someone gave me his name and said, here's someone who's possibly a candidate for Lighthouse San Jose. And so we went out for Korean barbecue. Remember that time we sat?
That sealed the deal, right? Korean barbecue?
Yeah, it's a good starting point. If they don't like Korean barbecue, then I don't know. I don't know what I can do.
Look elsewhere.
But I'll tell you one of the things. If you know Mark, you know me. We are different. Okay, different personality, different style, different everything. But I can tell you one of the things I appreciate about Mark so much is just how much he really genuinely cares. You might not always get to see that. And I think sometimes, I've been told that I'm kind of a hard person, that we're intimidating, people don't want to talk. I understand that.
That's why God brought me in, to loosen things up for you.
But I'll tell you, I have a very vivid memory. This was maybe last summer or the summer before. For the first time, we got all the pastors' families together. We're in San Diego, and we're excited because we're going to have this pastor's family retreat. And from the get-go, it went crazy. We went to this Airbnb where the first morning we wake up and someone knocks on the door, and I open it, and there must be 12 guys with machine guns and drug enforcement agency, the sheriff. They were just all there, and I just remember thinking, "Uh-oh." And they're like, "Is so-and-so here?" And evidently someone lived there who was involved with drugs. And like, "Can we come in and search the house?" I'm like, "Yeah, go ahead." So he came and 12, and they're searching the whole place. And we decided to leave that Airbnb. We're like, yeah, we don't feel too safe here. And then we went to another place. And then the next day, I got sick. I got, I think it was diverticulitis. And but having someone who's a medical doctor, it was so helpful, because I remember he was looking at me, and he's like, just kind of, okay, when you go to a doctor, you got to ask him this, and you got to ask him this, you got to ask him this, and then he just goes, forget it, I'm just going to go with you. And so went with me to ER, and I don't remember all the details, but I'm just glad he was there, because then on the way back, we get back to the house, I'm just feeling horrible, so I start vomiting. And here comes Mark. He's just holding me as I'm vomiting, on the street. And, I'm thinking, okay, I'm vomiting, but I'm really glad Mark's here, And he's holding me up. And, I'm a little bigger than Mark. But I truly felt literally this support. And for the next several days, I couldn't do anything. And he took care of me. He gave me some, charcoal lemonade thing, and I was like, ew, what is this? But, well, Dr. Mark knows what he's doing, so I'm going to drink that. And but I think more than anything, it was just this sense where I was so thankful God provided a true partner in ministry. It is hard to find. And I can tell you, for pastors, it is especially difficult to know if you could trust someone. I've had to go through some, betrayals along the way, and those have been the most painful. But God has also been incredibly gracious to provide the kind of friends and supports from a pastoral point of view to... I know when I talk to Mark, I don't need to pretend. And I know he's not going to pretend. He's a straight shooter. He's going to remind me of the things I need to hear. But to have someone who so genuinely cares, it's hard to find. And so I am so thankful for Mark and Julie. Every time I get to go up there, and we try to have dinner and have a chance to catch up, and I can't tell you how much of a blessing it is to have them. And the fact that he married Julie, remember when I was talking to Pastor Alex Montoya, those of you remember, he came and spoke for our retreat a few years ago. That was one of the things he said. He goes, "It matters who you marry." He goes, "You could either marry an Abigail who had a fool of a husband, right? But she was, the way she carried herself about, she literally saved her husband's neck, right? Because David and his men had protected, the fields and so forth. And this guy was completely disregarding them. So Abigail was someone, said you could be an Abigail who can cover for your foolishness and be a strength, or you can be a Jezebel. And if you know the story of Jezebel, there's a reason why you don't name your daughter Jezebel. Okay? There's nothing good about that name. She enabled and empowered her husband to be more sinful and wicked. So it makes a difference who you marry. And I think that's one of the things I remember I spoke at a college retreat. They were saying, if there's some counsel you could give to a young man considering ministry, what would you tell them? And I was like, told him, make sure you marry the right person or else you're in trouble. But I think it goes beyond even ministry. As a Christian, it matters. And so one of the things I encourage you to do, as Pastor Mark and Julie are here with us for the weekend, grab them at a meal, okay? Ask them for more details for their story. Ladies, you're going to have a chance to meet with Julie tomorrow after lunch, and she's going to be sharing with you. But throughout the free time and so forth, please take advantage of that. Well, we're going to end it with that.
Just say, if you're vomiting, Pastor John will help you out because he now knows everything that I taught him, and so we'll hold you up and help you out.
I'll hold you. Let it go. All right. Well, thank you, Mark. We look forward to a wonderful weekend. Just some closing announcements that I'm going to leave you with.